Hello and welcome to this edition of Inside Tacoma. I'm your host, Randall Lewis. Our guest for our conversation today, City Council Member Anders Ibsen. Welcome back and Happy New Year.
Great to be here. Happy New Year.
All right, now you've done some traveling recently.
I have.
And to China, which is you're not the first City Council member to go to China. But we'll talk about China a little bit. But you also went somewhere that we haven't had a lot of council members go over the years. You went to India for a while.
That's right.
So let's talk about that. We don't have a sister city in India.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so something maybe in the works?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
So the basis of this trip is that there are a number of companies and sectors that we'd like to attract, primarily in the tech sector, who are looking at expanding to the west coast of the United States in the long term. And over the past several years, the city has had a priority of attracting more foreign investment, which has primarily come from Asian countries like China and Vietnam, less so for India. India is very underutilized.
Well, you're in Asia too.
Right.
Right.
Hence,
South Asia.
Right, South Asia, right. But very underutilized. And so we made the case to a number of CEOs from tech companies, primarily in the South. So besides Delhi, we were primarily in cities like Hyderabad, Bangalore, which are the two tech cities, as well as Mumbai. And we spoke to representatives of these tech companies and made the case for why Tacoma in particular is a very attractive opportunity for them, given our access and our proximity to international markets, our highly educated workforce, our natural amenities, our quality of life, our municipal broadband and other infrastructure, and overall just made that case. And we're going to try to see if we can entertain a delegation from them later this summer.
All right. So, and I understand that they are building new cities all the time.
Yes, they are.
In India.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah, the city of Delhi alone grows by over 400,000 people per year. So imagine a city having the equivalent of 2 Tacomas move in every year, because they're still a developing, urbanizing country. But yeah, this is something that's really opportune, and we're really excited about the possibility. But one of the potentials for a sister city is a new provincial capital in the south, which will be their first planned green city. And that's potentially a sister city candidate. But we met with their representatives, and it's very exciting stuff.
Yeah, they've created a new state, right? Because the population is growing so much, they need to create new states for representation purposes.
That's right.
Okay. So yeah, it's an amazing place the kind of mind-boggling to think of the type of growth that's occurring there.
Oh, yes. Oh, there's people everywhere, not to mention cows and dogs and so forth around the streets. All right. Especially cows.
So you were in India, and then did you fly directly from India to China or vice versa, or did you come back home?
Well, it was China, then home, then council for a week, and then Dubai, and then India, and then back and so forth.
That's a lot of time on airplanes.
It is, yes.
Because people talk about how there's a lot of travel between Europe and India, but from the west coast of the United States to India, it is a particularly long journey.
Oh, I got a lot of reading done. It was great.
Okay. So in China, I went to our sister city.
Yes, Fuzhou, one of our 3 sister cities in China.
Okay.
And it was actually very timely, because it wasn't just about individual sister city relationships, but it was all about trade and about what's happening with what they call the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's new attempt basically at geopolitics, and they see it as a rebranded Silk Road, basically. And there's all sorts of international political implications there, but when it comes to the city, we just see it as a city government in terms of a continuation of the foreign investment and the development opportunities that we see in our local and regional economy.
Okay. Now, when you go there, or in this particular trip, do they realize you're the city representative of the city of Tacoma in the state of Washington in the United States? And you're not responsible for tariffs or trade policy for the United States government. So I assume that discussion doesn't come up with conversation
with
you. Oh, it does? Okay.
Oh, especially, yeah. I mean, China was pretty on the nose about it, at least the first day. And it came up in polite conversation. And of course, I explained the city of Tacoma's position on the fact that we don't see trade and we don't see investment as zero sum, but as something that's of mutual benefit. And that's something that did come up. But yeah, in China, my wife and I were literally the only Americans there. So I had to speak on behalf of a country as well as a city to some extent. Okay. And indeed, it was just me and city staff representing the city in that respect.
Okay. And so we have the sister city relationship is an important part of these foreign travels because we do have interchange. Folks from Fuzhou come here frequently. They've given us gifts, which we enjoy daily.
They love our chocolate. They love our glass art.
Right.
It was great.
So, but the opportunity for exploring possible sister city relationships in the world's second second largest nation in
Soon to
India.
be the first.
Really, they're going to.
Yeah, their population trajectories are going to be even higher than China's in the long term.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that we've not had a sister city relationship there before. I know there's other cities in the U.S. that have clearly done that with India, but the sister city is sort of the beneficiary of the or the kind of the focus or the fulcrum of these relationships. But trade is really what it's about, and that's especially in Washington State, the most trade dependent state in the nation.
That's really true.
That is really true. Yes.
And it's really what you make of it. That's what I think we're doing better with Sister Cities, frankly. And we have some very good staff at the city who are responsible for sister city relations, like Debbie Bingham and other people who do really good work in that respect. Debbie was very helpful on both of these trips. But what I think is really important with the new sister cities, and especially the ones in Asia, is that before, sister cities were really just something very ceremonial and frankly something very politicized. Some council member would get a bright idea, we should have a sister city in this country, and then nothing would happen. So really, to make a sister city relationship something that actually produces something of value, there has to be something other than just the politicians involved. There have to be active committees who are independent of the city government, who are comprised of the business people, comprised of the expatriates, the NGO representatives and so forth, who really have something to gain and have those ties that outlast the politicians and their political terms, working on both ends. And I think that's what we're starting to have both with China and India.
Okay. Well, that's great. And so that was a very busy December, and certainly a different one for most people who got busy.
I got back right before Christmas.
Holiday shopping, and you're traveling throughout Asia with a trip back to Tacoma for a council meeting.
Of course.
In between. All right.
Wouldn't miss that. It's a council meeting.
You can call in to those.
I wouldn't dare.
Okay. All right. Okay. But you're kind of here in Tacoma now for a few months? Or?
Yes, I'm in the same time zone for the foreseeable future, yes.
Okay, great.
What a relief.
But as we enter 2019, we have to focus on this. This is actually your last year on the City Council.
It is, yes.
8 years have gone by 7 so far, but gone by very quickly.
They have.
And City Council, for folks who don't know, has term limits of two 4-year terms. So I want to know, do you have a bucket list of things you want to get done in your last year?
I sure do, Randy. Yeah, it's been such a wild ride. I've loved it. There's been high points, there's been low points, but just having the opportunity to make a measurable difference, whether it's on the individual level with someone's pothole or someone's permit or business license or code enforcement problem, to something on the largest policy scale imaginable, like our worker standards, like our environmental health, like our overall economy and development opportunities. Public service is wonderful, and anyone who's remotely interested, I think everyone should try it at least once. I think it's just a dream come true. It's been such a wonderful opportunity. But yes, I'm very list-oriented, I always have been, and there are a few items on my list that I'm trying to either tackle completely this year or at least get them in a good state for the next successive councils and whoever replaces me in District 1. And they include, but are not limited to, seeing through the master plan with Ruston Way. That's something that I introduced a couple of years ago in the city budget. It's something that Metro Parks matched us dollar for dollar, and they're doing a great job facilitating conversations about what the multi-decade future of that beautiful corridor looks like in Ruston Way, so that's ongoing. We have a long-term economic development, workforce development, and community vitality conversation with our anchor institutions, which include UW-T, the hospitals, Multicare and Franciscan, UPS, and basically our eds and meds in the city. And what more can we do to work together with a concerted economic development, worker training, and endowment investment strategy with all of our partners to grow our economy from the bottom up? So that's something that we've started to see some fruit, and we're gonna look for some demonstration projects to get generated pretty soon. We have an asset mapping exercise that Forterra is facilitating with different governmental agencies like the city, Metro Parks, and the Housing Authority to look at vacant land and surplus land that various governments own and try to break down the silos so we can actually have a master plan for looking long range at where might be some great opportunities for affordable housing, for example. What are some good economic development opportunities? Where might there be need for additional services down the road, like schools or parks and so forth? And just breaking down those silos and having a common frame of reference to increase government efficiency. That's something I'm going to see to the end, hopefully. Electric cars. TPU is actually rolling out a new incentive program this year to just give people a couple $100 to see, to study what the usage is for electric car charging. At the same time, we're also pursuing the right to give rebates. Currently, we're trying to get a bill passed this session, and we'll advocate, and thanks to your help, Randy, the city's included that in our advocacy plan to give us the same authority to give you, the ratepayers, rebates for having charging equipment in your homes for electric cars, the same kind of rebates you can currently get for ductless heat pumps, window efficiency replacements, insulation, and so forth. Because we're very fortunate that we have a clean energy supply, so we don't have coal power plants that are befouling the air, but most of our emissions come from transportation. So if we can electrify your cars, if we can electrify our city fleets, we can change our buses like Pierce Transit is doing to electric vehicles, then we're going to be in a really good spot and we can meet our climate goals. So that's something I'm really trying to see through and get on a good momentum later this year, and various other issues too.
All right. Well, let's talk about that one a little bit, because certainly climate change is something that people are talking about, whether they agree with human cause or how much the humans have caused the change or not. We'll set that aside. We seem to have come to the point that, yeah, things are changing, and there's probably bad effects if we don't do something about it. We're seeing historic storms and historic fires and things like that.
My wife and I had to go we were at the Iditarod last year. We actually flew into Anchorage to actually look at the sled racing. And in the year prior, they actually had to move the Iditarod further north because there wasn't enough snow in Alaska, of all places.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing declining fish populations. We're seeing starving orcas right here in the Puget Sound. We're anticipating, as part of the Ruston Way Master Plan and as part of the Tide Flats Sub-Area Plan the city is looking at, what are the impacts to our maritime industry, our freight, our recreation opportunities when people are walking and enjoying Ruston Way? What's that going to look like when the sea level rises and we lose some of our shoreline? So this is something that's happening right now and is going to be very much an impact to our health, our quality of life, and our economy too.
Right. So and as you mentioned, though in Washington State, because of our dependence on hydroelectric power, which is a clean, renewable power, some people dispute whether it's renewable or not. Well, we're not going to go there today.
Sure.
But it is what we rely on in Washington State for the largest part, though we do have some nuclear as well, but that's also not a greenhouse gas producing power source. So because of that, transportation is the number one source of carbon in our air in Washington State. And that is, that's both a plus and a minus. I mean, the minus is that there's not some big target, some big factory somewhere that you can go after to reduce a lot of emissions. The minus is there's millions of things out there that are contributing to that. My Prius is contributing to that a little bit.
But it's not discouraging. If you look at other successful local government-led efforts, a great example is what we did with graduation rates here in Tacoma Public Schools. So, fun fact, our superintendent, Carla Santorno, was actually rated as the #1 superintendent in the country just a couple of years ago. And just recently, Tacoma Public Schools released a new figure, and OSPI, I think, did as well, proving that our graduation rate is actually over 89%, which is 5 percentage points higher than the national average, right? So we've made some staggering progress, and by local reports, most of that progress has been made with underprivileged populations, actually giving individualized attention and just doing a lot of small things with the cumulative effect of all these small improvements, adding up to a very big and very sustainable improvement. And that was a very attractive point, a very attractive feature of our community that a lot of people in these Asian countries I went to really caught on to, is the fact that not only is our workforce educated, but our leadership locally with the city, our philanthropic community or business community is enlightened enough to invest in these kinds of improvements. So that's not just something worth boasting about for our schools. That's proof that the web of all these small problems can also be a web of small improvements if we work in concert, break down silos, and act strategically. So I don't think that's insurmountable. I think we can do that just as well, if not better.
Okay, and let's focus on that. I mean, that's optimistic. I love the way you tied it to a real world example of schools through dozens and dozens of small actions. You create major change, and we're going to have to do that with transportation, because you talk about people's passenger cars. Provide one, and so let's just focus on that, because that's the one that everybody has. What we still live in an economy where most people buy a car. A lot of millennials do not, but and they will soon be the largest segment of our population. But right now, I'd still say majority of Tacomans have one or two vehicles.
Right.
So how do we incentivize them to try to electrify their fleet? Let's just start right there. What are the things we have in mind with that?
Well, with electrification, there are a number of different incentives, both on the city level and for the individual consumer. So one of the biggest that we're, again, currently seeking approval for in the legislature is being able to give people a rebate, just an actual cash-for-cash rebate for installing charging equipment in their homes, in their garages. Up to $900, I think. So that's going to be huge. That's a great market incentive. And for the people who live in older neighborhoods, like in South Tacoma or the North Slope or other places that predate automobiles and don't have garages, where you just park on the street, or like in Central Tacoma, we're looking at different kinds of infrastructure for what are called garage orphans. So maybe we can install chargers on the right-of-way, for example, or we can give people rebates and incentives to have that installation, and we can do it similar to sidewalk improvements, right? So different kinds of incentive there. We've extended rebates, and we're looking at a more systematized setup for helping our dealers, our car dealerships, actually be made whole for selling electric vehicles. So how can we promote these dealerships? How can we...
Because there's not as much maintenance with an electric car.
Right, there's less maintenance for electric cars. So
right.
How can we make up for that with increased business, increased promotional opportunities, making sure that they can not only survive but thrive in this new kind of marketplace? Because it's not just neat public policy. This is fundamentally the market shifting with not even Tesla, but more and more companies moving away from internal combustion and more towards electricity. So that's again something that we can do on the consumer side, is helping car dealerships as well as helping consumers, and also setting up our code, setting up our public transportation infrastructure with working with Pierce Transit, for example, as they electrify, and helping them apply for grants, and making sure that our transportation plan reflects that and plans for that accordingly. And what we can also do is look at our building code. So we can look at when we have new construction, we have new development. Do we ensure that builders have a clear expectation of the kinds of connection lines? I don't know the technical terms, but the kinds of building expectations and code expectations for ensuring that new construction can accommodate these charging stations and accommodate where these cars are going to be placed. And also just recognizing the fact that there is no such thing as a singular issue. There's no single transportation issue, just like there's no singular housing affordability or smart growth issue. They're all interrelated. So if you can create more jobs here locally that don't require a long King County commute, you've just saved a bunch of carbon emissions, you've just saved a bunch of time and money for people who are now able to maybe not drive, maybe take public transportation or walk, or even use an e-scooter for that matter, to get to where they need to go, right? So if people can live, work, and shop and recreate in the same areas, generally you're in a much better place. If people can actually afford to live in the same areas where their job is, and those jobs are living wage, then that has all sorts of positive spillover effect. So everything is interrelated, and just having that bigger picture perspective is something that local government, as well as state and federal government, need to all use in concert.
Well, I think there's some great points in there, and I want to focus on one because e-scooters is actually part of the solution, and is a thing that Tacoma seems to have embraced a little more so than a lot of other communities.
Sure.
Spokane kind of went into it, but has largely gotten out of the market, at least through the winter, which I can understand in Spokane. It does tend to snow a lot in Spokane. Sure. But they may be back in the spring. Seattle's clearly not interested in the scooters. Tacomans seem to have embraced them. Well, we'd still get some complaints to our 311 system. You read things in the paper about somebody having to, being upset because they had to walk around an e-scooter on a sidewalk, or somebody went past them really fast and startled them on an e-scooter. But that's kind of what strikes me as the folks who complain that they can't park in front of the door of the store they want to go to.
Sure. And I've gotten my fair share of calls and emails in concern about this issue, and I'm never going to disparage their legitimate concern. Someone who's elderly or someone who's disabled, it can be threatening sometimes to see something coming out of nowhere. So I definitely am sympathetic to that. But at the same time, how many people also get hit by 6-ton, 10-ton vehicles going by at 45 miles per hour instead throughout our city with far worse consequences to that, right? So for me, I don't simply see these things as fun novelties. I mean, I've ridden Lime and Bird, in Proctor, Point Ruston Way, and they're fun. But I also have friends who work downtown, for example, or who work in Seattle and commute, And what these e-bikes and e-scooters represent isn't just a fun novelty, but that missing mile or that missing link between taking the train or taking the bus. That's great, but how do I get to my office? How do I get back home, right? So you see this really cheap, just $1 and then 15 cents per minute tool for getting to that last little bit of connection to your final destination. And you're looking at something that's really cheap and convenient. And what I think this could also have some great implications for is students. Because UW-T, one of the biggest complaints I've gotten over the years from students there is that we have 90-minute parking, which local merchants and restaurants have requested because they need turnover to ensure they get enough people to visit their businesses. It's really hard to operate a business down there sometimes, and especially with all the construction that's been going on over the years. But students have legitimately complained that, well, my classes are 90 minutes. I don't want to get a ticket. So as UW-T, going back to the anchor institution perspective, as UW-T, for example, looks at more real estate development and building student housing, because their student body is very commuter-oriented still. Only about 7% of their student body lives downtown currently. Currently is the key word. We're starting to see some new developments there. This could be a great feature, because instead of paying hundreds of dollars on operating costs, maintenance, fuel for a car, or waiting a long time for a bus, you could just take an e-scooter and just pay maybe $40 or $50 per month instead, a fraction of the cost to get to where you need to go without having to worry about when is the meter reader going to ding me, right? So it's all about enhancing safety and options. That's the best perspective for looking at transportation, is how can we enhance the safety of an area to make people feel more secure so they can enjoy themselves, and how do we expand the amount of options people have to get to where they need to go.
Right, and the other thing about Tacoma, that when we first started seeing the scooters come to town, I was struck by people saying, "Well, Tacoma's so hilly, it'll never work." But actually, Tacoma's not as hilly only if you're going east to west.
Right.
Downtown Tacoma is very flat if you're going north to south, and so you can easily maneuver up and down Tacoma. I can go from City Hall to a meeting at the UW Tacoma on it. I can walk down the street to a couple blocks and wait for the light rail to come, which I've done many times, but they're usually a Lime scooter right outside City Hall, which I can hop on and I've done this many times, go down to the UW Tacoma.
And that light rail is going to make a lot more sense once we expand it through Stadium and down Hilltop, and then long down the road once we expand it to the airport, and once we expand it down South 19th Street down the road. I mean, eventually it's going to be a little bit more Portland in the sense that you'll actually have a meaningful citywide grid that can be the spine of these different transportation options.
Right. Now let's go back to the transportation issue as for climate change purposes. A lot of what you're talking about is individual private citizens' cars. The city is, of course, a major buyer of vehicles.
Of course.
And now you don't have to look too hard to find that the city has a lot of electric vehicles. You can tell because our logo is on the side of many Nissan Leafs around the city, and there will be soon even more choices for the city to get to. We have Pierce Transit with some electric buses, but we also have other kinds of vehicles. We have a lot of stuff that's really heavy-duty diesel equipment, garbage trucks, fire trucks, rescue vehicles, plows, all sorts of stuff. Is there any likelihood, police cars, is there any likelihood that we're going to be able to electrify, those portions of this fleet?
Down the road, absolutely. The technology is only going to get cheaper and more cost-effective down the road, and I'm very optimistic about that. But even in the meantime, there are all sorts of different stopping points until we get there. So currently, you mentioned garbage trucks. As part of our overall perspective when it comes to sustainability, something we do currently is we use waste gases from our treatment plants, or our sewage treatment plants through the city, and we use those waste gases to actually create fuel for some of our heavy-duty vehicles, like our garbage trucks. We actually use that as compressed natural gas to fuel some of the heaviest trucks in our fleet. So we're currently already doing that, and there actually may be a little bit of export from the surplus gas that we don't need, similar to what we do with our electricity on the wholesale power market, and similar to what we do with Tagra already. So it's all about kind of cliche, but that reduce, reuse, recycle rubric. So that's something we're currently doing, and we're always going to look for those kinds of efficiencies until we get to longer term solutions like complete electrification. But I'm very hopeful on that front.
All right. Shifting gears just a little bit, when you're not being a city council member,
Yes.
you work in real estate.
That's right.
And that's been, of course, a subject that the city council has dealt with too. So you've dealt with it in both your private sector job as well as your public sector job.
It's a really changing market, yeah.
Yeah, a very changing market. I got to ask you, the city spent a lot of time over the last year dealing with a kind of a crisis in the community regarding rents and people's tenant rights. Essentially, was the issue we had.
Sure.
Situation I'm sure everybody's familiar with, the tiki apartments and what happened there. It led to major policy change by the city of Tacoma by the end of last year. There was some concern expressed that was going to have an impact on rents, that would drive prices up even more. That the city did put some language in that it would look at that over a period of time. But you're a real estate professional. What do you think the likelihood of prices changing over the next year is based on government regulation or just the market?
None at all.
Or what of all?
The impact of government regulation is so overstated when it comes to the private marketplace. There are really three major causes that affect price, both for sales value as well as rent. And first and foremost, the Northwest is an attractive place. There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of additional people that we will have to accommodate because people like the Northwest as a region. There are a lot of high-paying jobs from up-and-coming sectors like the tech sector and even in manufacturing, places like Boeing, which still employ tens of thousands of people. And that's not changing. If anything, it's going to intensify as jobs become more and more concentrated in just the dozen or so major metropolitan zones in the country. So that's a nationwide trend, and we're just going to see more of that throughout the Seattle, Bellevue, Tacoma region. So that's only going to continue economically. And we're also just a nice place. We have moderate weather. We're very close to international markets, so businesses really care about that. We're close to really neat natural parks. We have a really well-educated workforce, and that front is only going to improve with time. So we have all sorts of great things going for us, and that just attracts people and that attracts businesses. So that's the demand side. The other side, of course, is supply. And we're largely built out, at least in a suburban perspective. We have yet to really activate infill in most of our neighborhoods. And even in our mixed-use centers, the height is only about 65 feet, which compared to places like India or China or nationwide it's an anthill, right? It's very small. It's not even Manhattan. So we have a really constrained supply as a result. So that means that as more people move into our city or want to move into our overall region, there are more people competing for the same amount of inventory. So when demand outpaces supply, what happens? Prices go up. And as more people with disposable income get priced out of more affluent areas like King County, or as more people get priced out of Vancouver and considered the United States and so forth, and the cycle goes through, that means not only do you have more people competing for the same supply, but you have more people willing to pay more. So those trends aren't stopping, and they're not stopping because of a few small regulations on giving people additional notice to move out or allowing people to have some amount of money to deal with the fact that they're being evicted and need to move to a different place. So those are, in my opinion, were very moderate recognitions of people's economic realities because we're a majority renter city. About 51% of our people rent versus own, and they're mostly concentrated south of the freeway. So I think that was a very balanced discussion that we had with our renters, with our landlord communities and other community stakeholders. But ultimately, small amounts of government regulation are not going to change these massive national, regional, and local economic trends.
All right. And sadly, we have to leave it right there. But
fair enough, Randy.
Thank you for being here today.
Of course. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. And our guest has been City Council Member Anders Ibsen. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Inside Tacoma.